2018 is sponsored by GE Aviation, No Starch Press, CBTS, CyberArk, Booz Allen Hamilton, Dark Rhino Security, Endgame, RSA, and US Bank. Join the conversation. Tweet us at BSides Cincy. The presentation will begin shortly. BSides Cincinnati 2018 is sponsored by GE Aviation, No Starch Press, CBTS, CyberArk, Booz Allen Hamilton, Dark Rhino Security, Endgame, RSA, and US Bank. Join the conversation. Tweet us at BSides Cincy. The presentation will begin shortly. BSides Cincinnati 2018 is sponsored by GE Aviation, No Starch Press, CBTS, CyberArk, Booz Allen Hamilton, Dark Rhino Security, Endgame, RSA, and US Bank. Join the conversation. Tweet us at BSides Cincy. The presentation will begin shortly. BSides Cincinnati 2018 is sponsored by GE Aviation, No Starch Press, CBTS, CyberArk, Booz Allen Hamilton, Dark Rhino Security.
Hey everybody, we get started here. I'm going to welcome Kyle Bubp onto the stage. He'll be talking.
Instead of holding the knowledge in so I would feel more comfortable, I know that other people are going to deal with this as well. And I noticed that there's a large mix of age ranges in the audience, and the interesting thing about this topic is that it will affect all of you at some point. So a little bit about myself. My entire career has mainly been focused on defensive stuff. I've led incident response teams. I've done digital forensics and investigations. I've worked with three-letter agencies on incident response. I've built cybersecurity programs, vulnerability management programs. Now I have done some offensive things, but primarily I'm focused on defense. My current role is VP of Information Security at SH Data Technologies. We're based out of Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where I drove up from yesterday. I'm also the founder of, I think, my 6th startup company, Legacy Forensics, and that company actually came out of what I've been doing. I have multiple first-hand experiences with digital forensics of the deceased, my own family members, as well as folks who have contracted me to help uncover a little bit more about their loved one's legacy after they pass. And again, that's where my idea of legacy forensics came out of. And if you want to contact me on Twitter, I'm Kyle Bubp, not that creative with the name there. So I always like to start a presentation with an agenda. I think it's respectful of the audience. Much like if you receive meeting invitations at work, they should have agendas, because if they don't have an agenda, that means that meeting organizer doesn't respect you. So I put an agenda here because there may be things that you were expecting out of this talk, and then when you read the agenda, you might think, hey, I'd rather go hang out at the bar, and I'm okay with that. So we're going to talk about how to deal with the sudden, unexpected death, both personally as well as digitally, what it means to be the executor of an estate, where to start when you have absolutely no idea where to start and you feel like you're isolated, how to discover the digital assets of the deceased, and then finally, how to prepare your own life for your own death so that you make it easier on those who follow you. We can't have this conversation without talking about death. So this is a story, I like to say it's a story of inspiration, addiction, anger, and depression. So this is my dad, Dan. I grew up about an hour north of here in a city called Springfield. My dad owned an automotive repair shop there. And in the early 90s, he started another company called Computer Services 2, or CS2. And if you're familiar with IBM OS2, I kind of feel like that's where he got the inspiration to name that company. But if he had never started that company, I don't think I would have ever gotten into computers. I probably would have been an automotive mechanic. In the early 90s, I remember playing Doom over a 28 baud modem with my cousins across town. My dad then started another company, and you can kind of see this entrepreneurial spirit, which I mentioned I've started 6 companies. I think that's kind of where I get this from. My dad started another company in Tennessee doing overhead crane maintenance and repair, which brought me to Knoxville. And then he bought yet another automotive repair company. So you can kind of see a line of entrepreneurship. And prior to starting Legacy Forensics, myself and Adrian Sanabria started a company called Savage Security, and we were acquired by a company called Threat Care. But again, I think that's where I get my entrepreneurial spirit. Now, about 5 years ago, my dad had back surgery. And, when you're working on automobiles all of your life and you're bending over the sides of cars to work on the engine bays, it takes a toll on your back. So my dad had back surgery. Well, he was prescribed opiates for the pain. And I believe that this is kind of where the downward spiral started. He got addicted to opiates. It took a toll on all of our relationships, my relationship with him, my mom's relationship with him, my sister's relationship with him. And a couple of years later, I ceased talking to him. My mom filed for divorce. And after the divorce was final, I believe my dad went into depression. And when you're already addicted to a substance and then you become depressed, you look for more ways to numb that pain. So he found other prescription drugs, and when the doctor stopped writing him prescriptions, he found other ways to get those drugs. A couple years ago, I was at home hanging out with my wife, and I get a call from my sister, and she's bawling. She says, "Kyle, Dad's overdosed. He's in the hospital." So what happened was my dad took too many pills, drank too much booze. His heart stopped. He was actually technically dead. The person with him called 911, and thankfully there was an officer in the close vicinity did CPR and was able to keep his heart pumping blood until the ambulance got there. So at this point I thought, the whole world is crashing down around me. I kind of went into emergency mode. I started trying to figure out, his bank accounts and all that stuff, tried to pay the bills while he was in the hospital. Now, he was in the hospital for about a month, maybe a little over a month. And I thought, okay, the drugs are out of the system, you're clean now. My sister and I sat down with him and talked to him about it. He said he was going to get help. And he actually did get help. And I found this through some posthumous discovery, I suppose. But eventually, depression set in again, and October 13th, 2017, my sister called me again and said, "Kyle, Dad's dead. He killed himself." So at that point, what do you do? I kind of want to say I saw it coming, but you never want to really see that coming, right? So when anyone passes away, the first thing you really need to do is stop and breathe and think and think about, take time to think about things. And there are some implications, both financial implications as well as digital forensics implications. Only tell people who absolutely need to know. and there's a reason for this. So when you have an estate, and that estate has debts, creditors, if you will, you're not obligated to reach out to those creditors. Instead, you file a notice to creditors in the newspaper. And what this means is, this is the official way that creditors know that, hey, they can file a claim against the estate. So let's say that you have an American Express debt of $100,000 and you pass away. And you do what's legally required of you. You file a notice to creditors in the newspaper. Well, if the estate closes in 1 year and American Express never files a claim against the estate, that's $100,000 the estate doesn't have to pay. Conversely, if you go out and start reaching out to all these creditors and say, hey, so-and-so's passed away, you can guarantee they're going to file a claim against the estate. The other reason is, for your digital assets, don't shut down your cell phone. Don't reach out to Google or Facebook or whomever and say so-and-so's passed away, because this is going to severely limit what you can do from a digital forensics perspective. And we'll get into that a little later. So how do you deal with tragedy? What I found is that everyone grieves differently. For me, it's open and honest communication. I mean, that's why I'm giving this presentation. I think part of it is wanting to educate and help others, but the other part is personal. It's for me to go through the grieving process, to address this thing, this horrible thing, and address it head on and acknowledge it and say, this is what happened, and this is how we're going to get through it. There's obviously a period of sorrow and mourning, and this can last the rest of your life. Another thing that's helped me is occupying my mind, occupying my time. Now, being the executor of an estate, I really have no choice but to occupy my time. But just staying busy and keeping your mind active. And that's not to say that you should just shut this bad thing out of your mind, but it certainly helps in the grieving process. A lot of people look for reasons as to why things happened. Some people believe that this is all part of some master plan. I personally don't believe that, but if that's what helps you feel better, then I'm not going to judge you for that. And then you hear this quote a lot, everything happens for a reason. Before my dad passed away, this meant something completely different to me. Before I had the experience of death of a loved one, everything happens for a reason meant to me that someone believed that everything was just all set out, predestined destiny. Like, for example, you go and you interview for a job and you don't get the job and you say, well, everything happens for a reason, it just wasn't meant to be. Well, now everything happens for a reason means to me that everything that happens is a consequence of the actions that had happened before it, leading up to that time. Now, you may perceive it differently, and that's fine, but that's how I perceive it. So another thing I found around open communication is that everyone has experienced loss of some sort. When I started opening it up to my friends about what had happened, I had found that other people have struggled with either addiction personally or addiction in their family. Folks had experienced loved ones who had committed suicide. And there's a saying that misery loves company, and it's absolutely true, and I found it to be very comforting. This is not something we just open up and talk about. I don't say, hey, nice to meet you, my name's Kyle Bubp, and oh, by the way, did you know that my dad died? Like, that's not an opener. But when you start talking to people and you realize that everyone has experienced some loss, it's comforting because you don't feel like you're alone anymore, and you feel like you can confide in someone that has also experienced that pain. I also got a great book recommendation by Catherine Ullman. She goes by Investigator Chick on Twitter. And it's okay that you're not okay. And it talks about how we live in a society that feels like you only get a certain amount of time to grieve, and then you got to get back on your horse and ride into the sunset and get back in the groove of things. And a lot of times that's not true. This is something that's going to affect me for the rest of my life. I'll never be over it, so to speak. But I recommend this if you have gone through something like this, or if you ever unfortunately have to go through something like this is a good book to read. So there were a lot of circumstances around that death where I just needed more answers. And because of my skill set, I felt obligated to my family to provide those answers because I knew that I could get them if I put in enough effort. So let's talk a little bit about the digital forensics of the deceased. For me, there are really three focus points. There are our mobile devices, which more and more we live off of. There are, our workstations, our laptops. And then what I found was really the most helpful were cloud accounts. So we'll start there. If you can get access to that person's primary email account, at that point, you have access to everything. And the reason for this is, if you say, hey, I forgot my password, please send me a password reset, they're going to send it to that primary email address. And so therefore, you can just chain these things together and get access to everything that that person had created. The issue is discovering what they had created. So I recommend searching through the inbox for keywords. Search for Facebook, search for Twitter, search for account, search for investment, things like that. How do we get access to this primary email account? Well, of course, password reset questions. This is how, what was it, Sarah Palin? Didn't Sarah Palin get hacked because somebody guessed her password reset questions? I use the term hacked lightly, but that's what the mainstream media use, so we'll go with that. But this is how I got access to not only my father's primary account, but also when I've been contracted to do this digital investigation on the deceased. This is how I get in, password reset questions. And this is easy because you're dealing with a loss and everyone wants to know more information about that loss. So you reach out to the family members for the answers to these password reset questions. So for example, I didn't know what street my dad grew up on. I didn't know what his first, pet's name was, but his sisters knew, and so I asked them, and then I got into his Gmail. Another thing you can do is just utilize the cookies that are saved on the laptops and workstations that you'll get into. Most people stay logged in. As a matter of fact, if you were to steal my laptop and type in inbox.google.com, you wouldn't have to authenticate because I'm already logged in, and I think I say, remember me for 30 days. But you can utilize these cookies to get access to these cloud accounts. And obviously mobile devices. If you have access to somebody's mobile device, you have access to their accounts. But what about 2FA? It's really unlikely that the person who's passed away has written down their 2FA backup codes. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've written down my 2FA backup codes. I probably should do that. But what I found was useful is to take the SIM out of their phone and swap it in to another phone, a burner. And for your burner, I recommend an iPhone, and this has to do with the way that we're going to break into iCloud accounts later. But if you swap that SIM into a burner, well, now you can just say, hey, I don't have my push device, send me an SMS text. And now you have that second factor where you can log in. Laptops and workstations, this is your basic forensics. You're going to pull the disk, you're going to do a DD image, you're going to let Autopsy go through it. If you're looking for deleted files, obviously Autopsy is going to find that for you. You can organize easily with Autopsy. For me, having a forensically sound image on my dad's stuff wasn't that important, so I just went directly to the drive. But if you are doing this for someone else, you probably want to use a write blocker and go through all the your standard forensics processes, so you're not tampering with the data. You have, your original, and then you have the piece that you're actually doing forensics on. You can use single user mode to get into a workstation if you don't know the password. Obviously, you can use a boot disk. You can reset if it's a Windows box, reset the admin password, go reset the user's password. Now I'm not talking about a domain joined machine, I'm talking about a personal workstation. On Mac OS, you can either use the Apple ID to recover the password, or you can use recovery mode. And like I mentioned earlier, the way we're going to get that Apple ID is by using the primary email address. This is the way that I got into another gentleman's account. He had multiple Apple devices. I didn't know the Apple ID, but I did have access to his Gmail. So I just said, please reset my password, and we were off to the races. But what about if it's encrypted? There's obviously a large debate between federal government and technology providers on putting backdoors and encryption. And there's a reason why. It's because it's you really can't crack it. Well, what I found is that there's actually still hope for encrypted devices. So Apple, if you let them, will store your file vault key in iCloud. So again, if you have access to iCloud, you can pull that file vault key back down and you can decrypt the drive. Microsoft does the same thing with Windows accounts. So your live accounts, if you let them, they'll store the BitLocker key in the cloud. Also, if you're in a domain environment and you're using BitLocker and you have MBAM set up, the recovery key actually gets stored with the computer object. So if you have a domain admin, you can pull the recovery key off the computer object. And these are ways that you can get in. Now you'll find some interesting things on the workstation, such as browser history, but if the user is using Chrome, there's actually some more interesting stuff you'll get, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. The third piece we talked about are mobile devices, and the way that we get into Android versus Apple devices is a little different. So Android has this idea of smart lock, and what smart lock does is if you visit a place multiple times, such as your work or your home, eventually Android will pop up and say, hey, I noticed that you visit this place a lot. Do you want to just keep your device unlocked while you're there for convenience? And if the user says yes, like at home, for example, then Android will keep that device unlocked at home. So if you have this person's device and you know where they live, you may try going to their house and seeing if the device automatically unlocks. Another thing that Smart Lock works with are Bluetooth devices. So for example, smartwatches. You can tell it, hey, if I have my smartwatch and it's connected to my smartwatch, keep my device unlocked. Or in-car audio. So again, these are methods that you're kind of thinking outside the box, but really it's extremely difficult to get into a phone that has a PIN or a pattern or a passphrase on it. So you kind of have to exhaust all of your options. If it's a Samsung device, you can use Samsung Find My Mobile to reset the PIN on that device. Unfortunately, Android Device Manager does not allow you to reset a PIN. It only allows you to set a PIN, and if there's already a passcode or a PIN set, you can't reset it. The only thing you can do is wipe it. But Samsung's Find My Mobile will allow you to reset the PIN. So like on Galaxy devices, you can reset the PIN. And again, we're going to chain accounts together to get access. So we're going to still rely on that primary email address. You can use the ADB bridge to reset a password using a SQL query, but it's unlikely that if you get a phone that's locked that they have USB debugging turned on, because your standard user isn't going to turn that on. And then there's the question around biometrics. So some of you may find this morbid, but I wish I would have thought of this before my dad was cremated, because I have yet to get into his phone. His phone is a pattern lock. It's a Nexus 6P. I have a notebook of all the patterns I've tried. I've yet to get in, and we're talking 8 months later. I just kind of gave up. If I had thought about this, then potentially I would have access to his phone. Now, I already have access to mostly everything I need access to, but it would be nice to be able to recover the text messages that were on that phone. But again, I kind of just have to chalk this up to I'm never going to see it. I have to accept reality, and we'll just move on. When we're dealing with Apple mobile devices, please do not try to brute force these. And the other case that I worked where it was a woman whose husband had passed away and some suspicious circumstances. So the local police took his cell phone, took his iPad because his iPad was in his car, and they continued to try to get into it. Well, what they essentially did was brick his devices. And once you try so many times on an Apple device, there's no going back. There is no timeout. It's just, sorry, you're not getting in. So the way I got into this was not an iTunes restore, although that is one way you could get in. But unfortunately, this person never plugged in their phone or their iPad to their iMac. So what I was able to do was an iCloud restore, and this took a little research and a little finagling. But I have a Mac Mini at home that I use for just this. I have an iPhone 6 at home that I use for just this. I had to log in to the Mac Mini as this person using his Apple ID. Then I had to tell the iPhone that I was going to do a restore from iCloud. Thankfully, he had an iCloud backup. But Apple's going to ask you to do 2FA, and Apple's 2FA is a little different. They're not going to send you a text. They're going to pop up the 2FA code on another Apple device. So that's why I had to log in to the Mac Mini so I could get that 2FA code so that I could put it back into the phone to restore from iCloud. Now what this didn't get me was, the text messages that were on the phone, any notes that he had written on the phone. But what it does do is restore anything that's in iCloud. So pictures, photos, things like that. Any email, and this was very helpful. Also, again, is the question around biometrics. I think this is something that we need to think about. It's not something that's pleasant to think about, but when we think about how much we live on our phones and how, I would argue that mobile devices are some of the most secure devices out there today, assuming that they're up to date and all of that, basic stuff. When we think about this, we really have to exhaust all options, and biometrics is one option that I feel like we need to exhaust. So I mentioned something about Google history, and if you have access to the workstation, you can look through the user's browser history, but Google history is not just search history. So if you use Chrome and you log in with your Google account on Chrome, it syncs everything. So your browser history, your bookmarks, your saved passwords. I would recommend not saving passwords in your browser, but it's going to bring all of that down to whatever computer you log into. So again, if you have access to the primary Google account, then you have access to all of this data, and it's going to make your forensics a lot easier because now you can essentially be this person. Google keeps location history, so every place you've ever been. So this was helpful to me because I wanted to know what was going on with my dad, a month up to this thing happening. And I was able to track every place that he had been, work, home, the grocery store, some places I had no idea what they were, but it was helpful to me to put context around what was going on. I even saw, the timeline of the day that he had passed away from where the sheriff's deputies took the phone from the house to the courthouse to lock it up. And then one other thing that people don't consider is that Google keeps voice history. So anytime you do a voice to text and say what you want to say into your Google phone or Android phone, it's going to keep that in Google's cloud unless you explicitly turn it off. And how many have explicitly turned this off? So like 1% of the room. So this was helpful to me because I actually got to hear the last words my dad ever spoke. And that was both emotionally jarring, but also somehow comforting. It's kind of weird. But you can take this voice history, and if you don't have access to text messages or things like that, you can kind of build a timeline off of what they're saying into this voice history. So that kind of wraps up the whole digital forensics piece of how to do forensics on the deceased. And if you notice, it's mostly about chaining things together, chaining accounts together, knowing where to look. Now let's talk about when we die, because everyone in this room is going to die. Even Jeff Bezos and Sergey, even though they're trying to live forever, by taking, what is the, Sergey takes like 100 vitamins a day. He's probably going to die too. And really this is about easing the burden for your loved ones. If you can tell, everything that was left for me was a mess, and you don't want to leave that for the folks who care about you because you care about them, I would hope. So I break this down into 3 pieces. You really need to organize your assets. And when I'm talking about assets, we're talking about financial assets, digital assets, and physical assets. And you need to write this down, like on paper. If you do it digitally or electronically, print it. I know that's like we're stepping back about a decade because no one uses paper anymore, but it's important that you write this down, and we'll get to why that's important. So financial assets, let's start with life insurance. If you have people that depend on you, you should probably have life insurance. And there's a differentiator between life insurance that your work provides and life insurance that you can buy in the open marketplace. So for example, I just recently started a new job. Now I have life insurance outside of this job, but let's say I pass away on my way back to Knoxville today. If I only relied on that life insurance from the new job, I'm sure I'm not within the 30, 90-day probationary period, and that would leave my wife with nothing. And that's not something you want to do. So I urge you to, one, get life insurance. Two, write down what the payout is, write down who to contact, how to file a claim, etc. Same with retirement assets, so you have 401k, IRA, Roth IRA. Write down what institutions they're with, write down the estimated values and who to contact. And same with investment brokerage accounts, so if you just invest in stocks just for fun, if you have some mutual funds or you have some index funds, it doesn't matter what it is. The point is you need to write this down, estimated values, and who to contact if you were to pass away. And also make sure your beneficiaries are up to date as you go through life. You know, before I was married, my primary beneficiary was my sister. Well, now it's not. It's my wife. Sorry, Stacy. However, she is the contingent beneficiary. So in the event of a horrible tragedy, Stacy will get everything. Checking and savings account. Now this seems like it's kind of a no-brainer, but it's really important, and I'll tell you why. So I had no idea where my dad's checking and savings accounts were. So what I had to do was I had to take his death certificate and the letters of testamentary from the court saying that I was the executor of the estate to every local bank in the Knoxville area and say, hey, does this person have an account here? That's not something you want to leave to someone else. You want to spell it out. Kind of a fringe thing, PayPal. Some people leave money in PayPal. If you do, write this down. Crypto. Does anyone have investments in crypto? I do. And I wrote down exactly where to get it. Now, you may have offline wallet. You may keep this in the cloud. The point is, write down how much coin you have and how to get access to it. You know, my uncle was telling me that my dad had a Bitcoin wallet. I have yet to find this Bitcoin wallet. It could not even exist, but it's important to document it. And then of obviously loans, debts, mortgages, you want to make a list of all the people you owe money to. That goes back to the whole, you know, notice to creditors. For the love of God, write a will. This has been so helpful for our family to determine exactly what needs to happen with the estate and the assets. You certainly don't want to just leave this to chance, especially if you have children and multiple children. There are going to be differentiating views as to what to do with your assets. So write a will, but be mindful of your executor. It is not an easy task. And if you choose the wrong one, it could probably lead to a lot of this. Now, I'm thankful that I haven't experienced this kind of bickering, but I've heard horror stories of, you know, siblings fighting over who gets what, siblings actually suing each other. So please spell it all out in your will. And here's an example. This is me. So since October 13th of 2017, I've spent about 570 hours on the estate. I've driven 6,320 miles. That's driving from New York City to Los Angeles, back to New York City, and you could probably make it about halfway back to LA. And I've had to spend money out of my own pocket to settle debts until the estate is settled. So I'd say that to illustrate that it's not an easy task, and you don't actually have to pick someone in your family to be the executor. You can pick a probate attorney to do it for you, and you know, I would recommend that. If you have a complex estate, I recommend that. You know, my dad's estate is a little complex because he owns that business, the automotive repair business. So technically now myself, my sister, and my brother own 33% of that business. And I have to, as the executor, I'm the only person that's authorized to sign checks. So every Friday, I have to go do payroll. Not cool. For our digital assets, password safes make this easy. If you're not using a password safe, you should be. I don't care what password safe you use, what your argument is over cloud-based versus local. It doesn't matter. Use one, put all of your digital accounts into the password safe, and document your master password, because without that, nobody's getting in. For mobile devices, you want to document your pins, your patterns, your passphrases. I mentioned earlier, I still haven't gotten into my dad's phone. Just alleviate that burden for your loved ones. Document your pins, patterns, passphrases. Now on if you're using something like LastPass or 1Password, you're probably using 2FA. You want to make sure that you have your 2FA backup code so those people can get into your safe, because without that 2FA, it's going to be really hard to get in. Now, I kind of sacrifice security for convenience. Shame on me, I suppose. But I use a tool called Authy. And what Authy does is it keeps all of your 2FA in one application. First you have to authenticate to it, and then you have to decrypt the actual database with another password. So this makes it really easy for my next of kin to get into all of my 2FA codes, but it also makes it really easy when I upgrade phones. So how many of you have gone through the hell of updating all of your 2FA stuff? Yeah, exactly. You have to generate the QR codes every time, and it's just a pain. So I use Authy to alleviate this pain. Again, assess your own risk. If you're not comfortable with it, don't use it. Same with cloud-based password managers. Now, some accounts actually allow for digital continuity. Some people call this a dead man switch. So LastPass has the idea of an emergency contact, which you can specify. So if there's no activity in your LastPass account for a certain amount of time, it'll notify that person and allow them to get into it. Facebook has the idea of a memorial account. I don't know. I kind of find this tacky, but if that's your thing, then do it. And then Google's inactive account manager. So kind of the same idea of LastPass. It's a dead man switch. If it doesn't see activity on your Google account for a certain amount of time, then it's going to notify that person that you set up and give them access to your Google account. So we've covered financial, we've covered digital. Now let's talk about physical assets. Again, firearms, jewelry, collectibles. Where are they stored? They might not be at your house. They might be in a storage facility. They might be at a friend's house. But just document what they are and the value, and if they have serial numbers, document that as well. And this is just a good practice to get into anyway for the purpose of homeowners insurance. God forbid anything happens to your house. If you have a list of all of your assets with serial numbers and values, you can claim that. Also, if someone breaks into your house and steals something, you already have that set up. So what we've essentially built is a death dossier of digital, financial, and physical assets. It's a mixture of paper and digital media. Like I said, you're writing this down, but you also have your 2FA stuff and your dead man switches, so to speak. You're going to put all of this in a sealed, tamper-evident envelope, and you want to store it somewhere safe, obviously. Now, you could put this in a safety deposit box, and I recommend that. But I also recommend putting it in a physical safe in your house. So 2 locations. That way, if your house burns down, you still have everything, in that safety deposit box. And it doesn't matter if no one knows where it is. So please tell your loved ones where it is, what the purpose of it is. You may even consider kind of doing a tabletop exercise, so to speak, of your own death, where, hey, you take over the accounts for a month. So if one of you, if you're in a relationship and one of you pays all the bills and the other one, does the other things, I don't know, swap roles. And so that way, if anything were to happen, it's not, well, how the heck do I get into all this? Who do I need to pay? Where's the money coming out of? They've done it before. So very similar to tabletop exercising and security, and the fact that when you have an incident, you practiced it. You know how to execute your incident response plan. So that's all I've got. Are there any questions? All right, no questions. Must have answered everything. Either that or we're all just depressed now and thinking about our own death. Well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.